Welcome back to the McCowan Podcast. The day of Game 3 of the World Series in Phoenix, the Diamondbacks and the Rangers are tied at a single game apiece. And Rich, looking back at the first games, Rich Griffin, I'd tell you that, boy, oh boy, oh boy, Game 1 was compelling and Game 2 wasn't necessarily that compelling with the way the Diamondbacks dominated. Where are the rest of this series going now?
Well, I think that obviously if it's 2 out of 3 in Arizona, if either team wins 2 out of 3, then it goes back to Texas. And that'll be the compelling part. Once they get to Texas, can the Rangers win game 6 and 7? I mean, that's not unprecedented for the home team to win the final 2 games and win the World Series. So I see this.
By the way, it's not unprecedented for the road team to win the last 2 games of a series too, based on what we saw in the American League Championship Series.
Yeah, no doubt. And the last time that there were 2, or the only other time that there were 2 wild card teams in, and Arizona with 84 wins, that's, I think 83 by the Cardinals was the fewest wins in the World Series winner by a World Series winner. So 84, I mean, they could have won more games, but they were still celebrating their wild card clinching on that final weekend. But I see the series at Chase Field going 2 out of 3, obviously either way, and then the series going back to Texas, to Arlington. And I just think the second game of the series showed the weakness of the Texas Rangers bullpen and the depth of their bullpen. And I think that's going to make a difference going down the stretch. The game 3 starter is a rookie, Brandon Pfaadt, who for the Diamondbacks, and he's been exceptional in the postseason. And to me, the Jays they have a great depth of 4 veteran starters, but they need a young guy to step up and join that rotation and be a Brandon Pfaadt type guy. And even if he comes up mid-season like Ricky Tiedemann, who's doing great in the Arizona Fall League and is one of the top 30 prospects in all of baseball, they haven't had a prospect like that since, Alek Manoah. And Manoah is still in that equation, but that's the difference between the Diamondbacks and the Blue Jays in terms of needing young players to step up. And the same with the Rangers, with Evan Carter and with Josh Young at third base. The Jays look at their farm system and they don't have that guy, or they haven't identified that guy yet. But in terms of this series moving forward, I could see the Diamondbacks winning 2 out of 3 at Chase Field, beginning with game 3, and then it going back to Texas, and who knows? I mean, if Corey Seager steps up, if Marcus Semien steps up, if Adolis Garcia continues to step up, then the Rangers have a puncher's chance there. But otherwise, I've predicted pre-World Series that the Diamondbacks in 7, and I'll stick with that.
Yeah, I'm actually interested to see how Max Scherzer pitches, just given one of the all-time guys tonight. And obviously, I think people know what kind of year he's had so far. So that's a really interesting story. And, it's interesting. Rich Griffin mentions Alek Manoah. This is where baseball is such an amazing game. If Alek Manoah comes back next year, right, and just has a above-average year, the whole Blue Jays team is different. Like, it's just we're talking about a team now that could really contend for the actual division lead. He's a young guy still. So this is where baseball is just is fascinating. But yeah, like Rich, I'm really interested to see how the Diamondbacks play at home. And, Scherzer's had such a historic career, and this may be sort of his last big moment. Although I don't know how the rotation sets up for game 7, but I'm kind of interested. I'm always interested when these like Kershaw types are pitching in the World Series and they're clearly nearer to the end and the beginning. And do they have like one last, maybe, great game in them? And that's what I'll be looking at Max Scherzer, just given obviously his history of pitching big in very important moments.
Yeah, the Scherzer storyline is pretty compelling, but I can see him, going 80 pitches, maybe 4 or 5 innings, and if he keeps them in the game, he's done his job. But clearly, coming back from a month off, his two previous starts have not been good in the postseason, but
Definitely.
he's a gamer. He goes out there, you know what he can do. And I think that if he gives them 4 or 5 in game 3, that he would be going out there in game 7 as their guy, because of who he is. Is same thing with the Dodgers when Clayton Kershaw. But you know, just going back to Manoah, and Manoah is in a position like Jose Barrios was, and like Yusei Kikuchi was, coming off of the 22 season. And
Definitely.
so there's no saying that he can't bounce back like that. And imagine if Kikuchi and Barrios had not bounced back and Manoah had done what he had done, the Blue Jays would have been winning in the low 70s at that point. There's no doubt it would have been a complete disaster. But that's what I think they're counting on, is the Blue Jays, again, counting on a comeback of some sort by Manoah. And like in his Instagram in the offseason, sometimes you see a guy who's been sort of shunned and pushed aside, reject his organization. But in his Instagram and his social media, he's seen wearing Blue Jays swag. He's wearing Blue Jays gear. And it looks like he's gearing up, and he shows working out programs, which I had never seen on his social media before. So maybe he's looking to come back with the Blue Jays. And if that happens, then, and they add, as Richard and I have suggested, re-add Lourdes Gurriel, I think the fan base could be back on board by the middle of March.
And just one thing on that, John, is that this is what Manoah provides in the same way I feel like Gurriel and Teo and Vladdy, when he's hot, is swag. And that's important. Like, you need, Patrick Beverley this week was getting on the Raptors like OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam don't scare me if I walk in the dark alley. It's pretty funny trash talk, but there's something to that. You need guys like Manoah on a team, to me, who are willing to go up to Garrett Cole and say, step over this line if you want to fight me. Like, you need certain guys to have attitude in the same way you need like the professionalism of Matt Chapman and Whit Merrifield. That's what Rich Griffin was getting into. Like, the mix is what creates, I think, a great team. And not only did they miss Manoah, I think obviously his pitching, I think they missed his attitude, because to me, there wasn't enough of those guys on this year's team. So I'm looking forward to him. And again, without knowing anything other than what Rich said about like his social media, I think he's going to come back and have a good year. Like, I have a good feeling that the light's going to click with this guy. He's going to come back in much better shape, which I think will be a significant issue for him. And generally speaking, like, guys don't, like, 25-year-olds don't lose it like all of a sudden. And we're not talking about a 35-year-old guy. And I would bet on Manoah. If I was buying, I would buy Manoah next year. That's just my feeling.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his last 6 years of his young life, 5 of them have been excellent and progressing, moving up the ladder, and one of them was last year. And so everybody's saying, well, that 1 year is what defines him, when in fact, I think, like Richard, the previous 5 years should be considered.
Any way to measure Rich Griffin of what his teammates thought of him, and what kind of impact that had on? What was his relationship by the time he was on the sidelines, not reporting to Buffalo, in and around Toronto, at Zoom at one point? Where were his teammates in all of this?
Well, I honestly believe, having been in the clubhouse and outside the clubhouse looking in this year, that it's, with the rest of the pitching staff, it's a big brother, little brother situation, and they were looking out for his well-being. I think the Players Association, the Players Union, has an unknown hand in all this, in terms of whether the Blue Jays abused, in terms of keeping Alek Manoah in the loop of what was going on. And I think that the teammates are on Alek Manoah's side. I think the teammates are looking for him at spring training to wrap him under their wing and bring him back, because they know how important he can be. And I think that's part of what Mark Shapiro was talking about, needing improved communication with the players, it wasn't just Barrios coming out of the game. It was everything. It was Anthony Bass. It was the entire situation of what goes on the coach's side of the clubhouse was never communicated directly until it happened in a game. And I think that the Manoah situation is one of those where Manoah was not in the loop. He was sent down to and explained after he was sent down to the player development complex to work on his basics without being in Buffalo. That was a good move. And then they brought him back and said, we're in the rotation because we're going to a 6-man rotation. And that was a good move. But then after, when they went back to a 5-man rotation and Hyunjin Ryu showed that he could contribute, because that was always the X factor, is he going to be able to come back from Tommy John and fit into that rotation? So they never told Manoah until Ryu showed that he could be that 5th starter. And then they just summarily dismissed Manoah back to the minor leagues. And I think that that's part of the communication process that Ross Atkins is not good at, that Mark Shapiro says needs to be improved. And therefore, I think inside the clubhouse, Manoah is good with his teammates.